we've been approached by a couple potential acquirers of the practice, and I don't even know if we're going to sell. Like this is probably like, last 100 days of the year. Like, PE firms are starting to reach out and kind of close their stuff out for the end of the year. But every time somebody reaches out about, I want to buy your practice, are you willing to sell your practice or whatever, I always do the dog and pony show, right? Like I'll always say yes. We'll always sign NDAs. I'll send them whatever information that I want, because a lot of it is like wanting to it does two things for me. One, it helps me understand what specific buyers are looking for. Like, oh, PE firms are looking for X, a strategic buyer like a PT chain or something like that might be looking for this other factor that's more important. Sometimes it's like an asset sale versus a stock sale, all that kind of stuff. And then the other thing that it does is it really makes sure, or it helps reinforce in my own mind, like holes in my management system, or things that need to be tightened up, right? Like this buyer that was reaching out really wanted to know about like weighted average revenue per visit based off of the trailing 6 months or something like that. So then it like forces me to go back into my reporting system, figure that stuff out. Do I have it readily available? How easily can I get a hold of the data? Can I track the data down? Can I get it turned around for them? And then what does that data tell me, right? So like that's something I've just been dealing with for the last couple of weeks, just because I'm doing it.
Yeah. Well, if you're up for, I mean, obviously don't name names, but if you're up for talking about this, then let's roll on it for a little bit. First of all, I love that you are exploring it, because I think you're absolutely right. Most people are like binary. They're like, no, I always say no. And the other people are like, they always say yes. And then you ask, why do they say yes? And then they'll just say something simplistic, like, I just want to see what it's worth. But what you're talking about is a more nuanced approach to it, which is, yeah, you probably want to see how much it's worth. But more importantly, it's like this third party view of the business.
It's like getting consulting without paying for consulting,
Bingo, man. Like, we haven't even talked about this, and you're nailing the talking point. Yeah, that's the key, right? And so as long as you can control the time suck that comes with this, then you definitely, I would think, get more value out of it than if you had paid like some consultant to deep dive into your business. So the other thing I'll say, by the way, that you're kind of alluding to is this idea of lifetime value. So when you think about, I'll just draw a parallel, for example, to the tech industry. Like, let's just talk about e-commerce, for example. If you went and looked at, and again, full disclosure, I'm an investor in a lot of companies like that, but just full disclosure, so now with that full disclosure, I get to see a lot of their economics and kind of their reports. One of the most common reports in those businesses is a cohort analysis of the lifetime value of their customer, so that you can figure out, like, okay, how much is an average customer worth, and how does that change over time, based on what ads you ran last September, the customers that came in around that time. Now it's a year later. How much money did you make off of them? My point is, it's so taboo to talk about that in this particular industry, but yet you just mentioned specifically that's one of the questions that these private equity folks are asking you, is like, essentially, what is the lifetime value of a customer over the trailing 6 months or 12 months or 18 months? And you're right. A lot of practice owners, they probably don't even know what that means.
Yeah.
And very much fewer of those people that do know what it means probably even have access to the data. But yeah, it's like, I remember at one of my businesses, it was like, we knew that that it cost us about $35 to get a customer. This is like in the consumer space, right? But we knew that like it cost us about $35 across all of our ad channels to get the average new customer. But we knew we'd make 4 grand off of that customer over the subsequent 4 years. So when you start to think about that, it's
Yeah,
like,
it's no brainer. Back a
yeah, if
truck
you
of money
know
after
that,
the ads.
bingo, right? It's like, that's the proverbial tree of life. And as long as you track your cash flow, you can just pile drive a lot of cash into customer acquisition. That's like the kind of conversation that we don't talk about in this industry. Yeah, PTOT and speech is like, it's like taboo to talk about patients as customers. But, whether or not they're willing to come back to you is a pretty good proxy of whether or not you actually delivered great care and a brand that they represent or that they remember, and things like that. So, if you don't mind, I'm curious, like, was that like, are there other questions you're getting from the PE firms? I don't know. Like, I just want to leave the question kind of vague. Like, are there, well, you mentioned gaps, like you're finding gaps in your management, in your reporting and stuff like that. What are some of the ones that, like, caught you by surprise that you had to go fix later?
Yeah, I think some of them have been around like just the actual like day-to-day management of the business. So I know we've talked about this in past past episodes, but like I treat maybe a patient a week. Like I'm not really in the clinic at all unless, my OT calls in sick or something like that. And as far as like the day-to-day running of the business goes, I mean they reach out to me for like big decisions, should we pay this, should we not pay this? Like I run payroll, but like I'm kind of out of a lot of the day-to-day decision making and inputting of data into the EMR, for example, or like onboarding patients. Like I have the system set up, and what we have is like, I can't remember where I heard to do this, but I've been doing it basically since I bought the business. Was we have two Excel spreadsheets, and one of them is called like the finance operations manual, and the other one is called like clinical operations manual. And each one of those spreadsheets have like 50 tabs each. And it's like my front office person could get hit by a bus. Hopefully it doesn't happen. But the person that we hire really just has to open up this sheet and say, okay, how do I, you know, enter a patient into the EMR? How do we go about verifying benefits on Availity? How do we go about submitting claim? Whatever it is, everything is in there. And I did this mainly because I didn't want to have to be asked again when I train somebody, or if we had turnover, if we were onboarding somebody new. I wanted it to be like a one and done. I'm putting effort into making sure the process works, and then I just want to make sure that it's there forever. And so there were a couple PE firms that reached out to us, and one was actually a strategic. They're like a big chain. I'm not going to name the name. And honestly, it almost sounded like an acqui-hire when they were reaching out and kind of inquiring. But the PE firm like lit up when I was talking about these two, Excel docs, and they were like, well, how transferable are those to other organizations? Like, is it just for you? Like, because I could already see in their mind, they're thinking like, okay, we could get this asset here and maybe, help other assets that we purchase. The strategic buyer, the one that was a PT practice, a large PT chain that was looking at potentially, I'd imagine, just given the labor market, they wanted to bias to hire the physician or the clinicians, right? They were like, they didn't care about that really at all. What they cared about was what the transition was going to look like. Did I have a director in place to, because I basically said, well, if I sell this thing, I'm going to walk away pretty soon because I'm already not doing much anyways. And that was like I could tell just by the questions they were asking and the kind of the body language, like that was being seen as a big risk for them, was that there was no clinic director like on paper even, like who's your PT that's going to manage everything when you're done? I'm like, well, we really don't need to because it's all in the spreadsheet, right? Like I don't need to hire a clinic director because if the front office manager can basically take a patient from lead to scheduled and done, like I don't really need much else, right? And that was I could almost tell that it was going to be a big hang up with this one potential buyer. But with the PE firm, it was like, man, we're super excited about this. Would you be selling those off as part of the business? Like, how do we get access to that? Like, it would have just been a totally different conversation with either of them. So it just kind of like, in my mind, like really solidified, like who would I want to sell this business to if I was to sell it? And then obviously without those kind of conversations, I'd have no idea, like, okay, like for this type of buyer, let's say I want to go with a strategic PT big chain and kind of put our organization into another quote unquote PT organization. The way the business is structured needs to look a lot differently than if it's a PE firm coming in and they're rolling this into a portfolio of healthcare businesses. And they really are cared about operations and financial performance and, things like that. I know some clinicians are going to hear that and already be like, well, we should never sell to something like that. But, it's a real possibility. You're going to sell your business either to like three options, right? Either somebody that you work with or that works for you is going to buy it from you as some sort of like small little deal of succession planning. A large strategic is going to purchase you, whether that be like a hospital system or a bigger PT chain, or a real an area that's been getting a lot of growth recently in the physical therapy market is like PE firms, right? They're buying these clinics and rolling them up and all of that. So understanding the buyer and what that means, or your potential buyer, your desired outcome, and then kind of reverse engineering what the business needs to look like for that. Because like I said, a PE firm is going to be very interested in some things that strategic PT chain, for example, doesn't even care about, or even a health system doesn't even care about, right?
Yeah.
So you could be putting a lot of effort into something that doesn't really matter if you want to just sell to your local hospital system or to, your local, I don't know, big PT chain.
If you'd like to learn more about Strata PT and see how our EMR and RCM works, head over to stratapt.com to book a demo.